Today is going to be part 2 of our series on Torah. Yesterday's video, we covered a few points as a quick summarization. We looked at scriptures from Shaul, Paul's own words, and where a lot of people misunderstand the words that he speaks, specifically in places like Galatia, Galatians, Corinthians, Ramia, Romans. We spent quite a while yesterday, over 2 hours, looking at those scriptures exegetically, not just one passage, but we read the entire chapter in which these particular passages showed up, and contextually speaking, we presented a clear case for what Shaul was trying to convey to the audiences in which he was ministering to, that while salvation of the Spirit was contingent first and foremost on the belief of who Yahshua was and what he did, it was incredibly important that Torah observance was also a part of the life of a believer. In large part, it's not just the fact that Torah is important for a believer, but also as a child of Yah, with the Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit of Father living inside of you, you will be naturally inclined to keep Torah. Now, there are certain facets of Torah that we do have to decide to observe. We need to choose to keep, because our human flesh and our selfish desires will try to make us do things in counter-observance of certain facets of Torah, mainly in matters of the Shabbat or in the Kodesh, the holy convocations, the feasts. But generally speaking, something that, again, we broached this very clearly yesterday, is as a child of Yah with the Spirit, the Ruach living inside of you, you now live a spiritual life. And with that spiritual life, it gives you the ability to be able to live in a way in which the Torah of Yah Almighty is naturally observed by you. Now, that does not mean we cannot sin. Doesn't mean that sin is completely out of our physical members. We can still sin. As I don't think we touched this yet, it might be in another scripture, but we also broached how Yochanan, John, and I believe it was Yochanan Aleph or 1 John. Actually, yes, we did, where the scripture conveys, and if anyone sins, we have an advocate with the Father, Yahshua HaMashiach, the righteous, and he himself is the propitiation for our sins, and not for ours only, but also for the whole world. Yes, you can still sin. So, most definitely, I'm not advocating the position that some Christians have through false interpretations of Scripture or lack of understanding that once you become saved, you live in a completely spiritual state and you cannot sin, which gives a lot of people a very dangerous proclivity to live a life of zero responsibility, where they think that they cannot sin at all, that they have total absolution or a removal of their physical from their spiritual when they're down here on the flesh. And therefore, many people manifest this belief where they can do whatever they want to do. Now, that's not true. We can still sin. As again, Yochanan Aleph, 1 John, very clearly conveys. But yesterday's main role was advocating that position, that as a child of Yah, it is, most importantly, the opportunity that Father opened in the Renewed Covenant Scriptures through giving Yahshua to do what it was that he did. That is what allows us to be saved. That is the spiritual atonement, the spiritual reckoning. It is what allows the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, to come and infill us. And that is our passage into the heavenly kingdom. But Torah observance, while not in of itself, by itself, in lack of faith in the renewed covenant, is not what gets us saved. Torah observance is still intrinsically linked to a believer. It was not absolved or done away with. Torah observance is still very important. Again, most of the precepts of Torah, the mitzvot, the commandments, the 10 commandments, as well as many other precepts of Torah, the law, we keep by extension if we are a true child of Yah. But that was what Shaul, as we looked at yesterday, was trying to convey concerning the passages in question. We are going to look at more scriptures today. Now, as always, I use proper sacred names and terms, Hebraically speaking. So when you hear me say words that you do not recognize, that is why. If you go and you look up these scriptures in a normal English Bible, you'll be seeing the normal terms. If you're using a Bible that has the sacred name theology or theophany integrated into that particular Bible, then you're going to be seeing, most likely, the words that I'm using. And when I say most likely, some Bibles use terms that they'll say Yehovah or Yehovah or Yahuwah, things like that. It's not common. Most sacred name translations use the proper sacred name of Father, as well as terms like Elohim, Adon, Adonai, etc. So with that summarization, that quick preface being made, let's go ahead and get into this without any further ado, because most likely this will be another long message. I don't know if it will be 2 hours long like the other one was, but just in case, let's go ahead and jump right into this. In Matthew, chapter 22, verses 34 through 40, this is what it reads, and these are Yahshua's words, as we are going to find here in a moment. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him, and saying, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the Torah, the law?" Yahshua said to him, "You shall love," and I will go ahead and say it here, "you shall love Yahweh, your Elohim, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great mitzvah, or commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two mitzvot, commandments, hang all the Torah and the Nevi'im, the prophets." So, continuing on with the theme from yesterday, and according to Yahshua's words, he simplified his father's mitzvot, his commandments in the Torah, into basically telling the people, if you love Yah, your Elohim, with all your strength, all your being, all that you are going to observe and keep the mitzvot and the commandments where Father is concerned. No idolatry, no blaspheming of his name. You will desire to honor his Shabbat, Sabbath. Likewise, if you love your neighbor as you love yourself, and as you love Father, you are going to be good to your fellow man. You will do good by them. You will be fair. You will not commit adultery. You will not steal. You will not lie. You will not murder. You won't covet. Or if you find yourself coveting, you will quickly repent. So it's important to note that in what I have been saying concerning Yahshua teaching a very simple way to follow Torah, this really proves and condenses that down. And what he said, on this hinges all the Torah and all the Nevi'im, all the prophets. And that goes right in hand with what Yahshua said before in the Besorah, the Gospels, when he said that he did not come to do away with the Torah or the Nevi'im, the prophets. He came to fulfill. So yet again, that keeps with the theme that Yahshua did not abolish his Father's law. He couldn't. He merely fulfilled the parts of Torah that were meant for him to fulfill. Sacrificial customs, ceremonial cleansing, etc. Now, when we look at Romans chapter 2, we're going to read this entire chapter for clarity. "Therefore, you are inexcusable, O man, whoever you are who judge. For in whatever you judge another, you condemn yourself. For you who judge practice the same things. But we know that the judgment of Elohim is according to truth against those who practice such things. And do you think this, O man, you who judge those practicing such things, and doing the same, that you will escape the judgment of Elohim? Or do you despise the riches of his goodness, forbearance, and long-suffering, not knowing that the goodness of Elohim leads you to repentance? But in accordance with your hardness and your impenitent heart, you are treasuring up for yourself wrath in the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of Elohim, who will render to each one according to his deeds. Eternal life to those who by patient continuance in doing good seek for glory, honor, and immortality. But to those who are self-seeking and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation and wrath, tribulation and anguish, on every soul of man who does evil, of the Jew first and also of the Greek. But of glory, honor, and peace to everyone who works what is good, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For there is no partiality with Elohim. For as many as have sinned without law will also perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law will be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are just in the sight of Elohim, but the doers of the law will be justified. For when Gentiles, who do not have the law, by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, are a law to themselves, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts, accusing or else excusing them. In the day when Elohim will judge the secrets of men by Yahshua HaMashiach according to my Besorah, or gospel. To break this down, when Shaul says here in verse 12, because that's what we need to look at, that's where the context comes into play concerning Torah. For as many as have sinned without law will also perish without law. So if you never knew the Torah and you sin regardless, then you're going to be punished regardless of whether you knew it or whether you didn't. And as many as have sinned in the law will be judged by the law. So again, it's one measuring line. If you didn't know Torah, but you sinned, you're going to be judged. If you knew Torah, you violated against it, you're going to be judged in the same way. For it is not the hearers of the law who are justified in the sight of Elohim, but the doers. That's very self-explanatory. You don't really need to go into that any deeper. It's not just enough to hear it, you have to do it and practice it. Self-explanatory. For when Gentiles, who do not have the law, by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, are a law to themselves. Plain, simple English, he is saying that every person in the world, because Father makes man in his image, every person is already created with a natural inclination to observe the things that Father establishes as his law. Everyone has that innate conscience. And Shaul even says in verse 15, who show the work of the law written in their hearts. Again, showing that men are born, they have the law ingrained in them. Every person ultimately knows they have a conscience. That goes right in line with what I was saying yesterday about there are people who, most individuals, even those who do not have faith, they have a desire to want to do what is good, things that are considered morally good. So whether you know Torah or whether you don't, whether you have faith, you don't have faith, most people inherently have that desire to want to do good and practice what is good, to try to practice what is good. It's ingrained in them. Obviously, sin gets in the way, and most people cannot do it. It constantly leads people to stumble. Their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts, accusing or else excusing them. He's literally saying exactly what I just did about conscience in a more poetic sense. Their conscience also bearing witness. So your conscience bears witness that everybody has the instinctive knowledge of the law inside of you. Even, just general what is right, what is wrong. And according to that conscience, then you're either going to feel like you are accused from doing something, or you're excused, that you're not guilty. All that is very self-explanatory. Indeed, you are called a Yehudai, which is Hebrew for Jew, and rest on the Torah, and make your boast in Elohim, and know his will, and approve the things that are excellent, being instructed out of the Torah, and are confident that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes, having the form of knowledge and truth in the Torah. You therefore, who teach another, do you not teach yourself? You who preach that a man should not steal, do you steal? You who say, do not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who make your boast in Torah, do you dishonor Elohim through breaking the Torah? For the name of Elohim is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, as it is written, There's a lot to unpack right here, very heavy, and it goes beyond just what you read in the scripture. You also need to understand the history of that particular time. But basically, what he's saying in the first part is, yeah, if you are Yehudai, if you're a Jew, for the people of Israel, and they have the Torah preached to them as part of their law and their culture, part of their lifestyle, they know how to live righteously. And with so many, for instance, the Pharisees, Sadducees, the Jewish aristocracy, this was also a jab at them, because a lot of those men, they felt like the Torah gave them a sense of self-righteousness, that their works made them super righteous, and they used it to look down on others. They used it to extort others. That's one of the things that Joshua harshly condemned them for, is they were taking advantage of the Torah. They were literally using certain precepts and parts of Torah, such as the laws concerning the Kohanim and how the people of Israel were to give to the Kohanim, the priests, to make a lavish lifestyle for themselves. But they would leave other important parts of the Torah, the law, unfulfilled. And Joshua gave them a very hard time for that. And that period of time was also very important, very common for Jewish aristocracy, teachers of Torah, because they were not following Torah in truth in their heart to glorify Father and to be good to their fellow man, to glorify Father. They would use it to judge and condemn and hypocrisy other people for committing adultery. So a priest would say, do not dishonor your father and your mother. And a very good example Joshua used of that is, he told the priest, he said, the Kohanim, in one of his many lectures to them, he said, you say to a man that whatever that you would give to your father and your mother is owed to us. Basically, following the priestly ordinances of the Torah, where the people of Israel had to give both tithe and even so much of their own funds to the Kohanim to help take care of them who were serving Father, they would use that law to tell common people, whatever you would take of your funds to take care of your father and mother, you need to give me that instead, because it's prescribed in Torah. And Joshua said, but by telling them to do that, you dishonor Torah. You make him dishonor Torah because he cannot honor his father and mother. What Joshua meant by that was, by you telling this man, whatever you would give to them, give to me instead. The mitzvot, the actual commandments of Father, one of the 10 is honor your father and your mother. Therefore, the child, they're obligated to take care of their parents, even financially. But if you take money from that child for yourself, when they can instead be using it to take care of their aging parents, or whatever the case may be, you are making them violate and transgress against Torah. You should observe these most important parts of Torah when not leaving the other parts of the commandments unfulfilled. In very simple terms, what he was saying about that is, have the man, the individuals, first show honor to their father and their mother. Take care of them first, and then have them follow the rest of the ordinances of Torah and pay you afterward with anything they have, with something extra, or later on when they get more. But don't have them take everything and give it all to you and leave none for their parents, because now they're leaving one commandment, very important commandment of Torah, unfulfilled, to satiate another, which benefits your greed. That happened a lot in those ancient times. It was very, very common in the first century of Judaism, for the aristocracy, the priests, the scribes, to use Torah to take advantage of people. And that was not why Father gave Torah. He didn't give it so you could hold yourself above other people, or so you could extort others. He gave it to you to know how to please him, to live a righteous life, to do right by others, to keep you from extortion and greed and acts of unfair, unrighteous wickedness. So that was very common. So when Shaul is saying here, you boast as a Yehudai, as a Jew, that you're a light to others and that you're a teacher, and you tell people don't do this and don't do that. But are you keeping Torah yourself? Are you abstaining from the things you tell others to abstain from, or are you doing those things? It was an admonishment of a lot of the hypocrites that existed in that time for teaching one thing and doing exactly the opposite. And in that period of time, especially because in Yahshua's time and in the time of the disciples, there were four main sects of Judaism, which was the sect of the Pharisees. They were based more out of synagogues. They didn't really so much centralize around the temple. You had the Sadducees. They were largely strict adherents to the importance of the physical temple in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. And a lot of that was because of their own descent, their own ancestry, where they came from within the Kodesh set apart Kohanim line. That was another reason why when Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, and the people of Israel both fell and were cast out of their land by the Romans after 70 AD and then leading up to the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was, I think, somewhere around 100 and some CE. I'd have to look up the date to be exact. The temple was destroyed. And after the temple was destroyed, the Sadducees largely vanished off the scene because the temple was gone. The Pharisees weren't really affected because they weren't localized. They were more dispersed in local synagogues and communities. And the Pharisees, interestingly, they are what really gave rise eventually to the modern rabbinical form of Judaism. That really harkens back to the Pharisees. But there were also two other primary groups. You had the Essenes. The Essenes, well, let's talk about the Zealots first, because the Essenes were a little deeper. The Zealots were a third group or sect of Judaism, that existed around the same time. The Zealots were very militaristic. They took a very literal, militant view on the dominance of Israel and how important it was that the physical borders of Israel were maintained. They cared very deeply about the kingship, about not living under the sovereignty of other local powers. They believed in the sovereignty of Israel, the independence. Again, Zealots. They were zealous for the independence of the state of Israel. The Essenes were different. They were a very ascetical group. Ascetic essentially means someone who deprives themselves of the pleasures of life in any form, whether it's food, drink, sexual pleasures. The Essenes were largely a desert community. They kept mostly to themselves. And interestingly, the Essenes are the ones who maintain most of the bodies of scriptures that ended up being preserved in the Qumran caves that were found in the 1940s, between 1945 to 1947, where a lot of the earliest Hebraic forms of the scriptures were found, as well as Greek, but Hebrew as well. The Essenes were largely responsible for the text found in the Qumran caves. But those were the four main groups of Judaism in that time. And due to these four different groups, the Torah was amongst all the different average people in Israel who identified with belonging to different groups of the Jewish sects. So the Sadducee, Pharisee, Essene, Zealot. Whichever group you identified with, largely your understanding of Torah was going to alter based on what sect of Judaism that you belong to. And even all four different groups of Judaism, they even had different canons, meaning that they saw different books as being scriptural. The Sadducees had their own. The Pharisees had their own. I believe that, I'd have to look this up again to be precise, but the Sadducees largely saw, I think it might have been the Torah as being inspired, but other books not so much. The Pharisees had their own list of canon within the Hebrew Old Testament, the Tanakh, that they viewed as being canonical. Likewise, the Zealots had their own, and the Essenes had their own. The Essenes adhered to a lot of the Jewish texts that are considered apocryphal now, such as the Maccabees, Wisdom, Sirach, Bel and the Dragon, Daniel and the account of Susanna, as well as the books of Enoch. So all four different groups all follow different canons. So kind of like Christianity that came later, that had different views of what was canonical in the New Testament as well as in the Old. The four different groups of Judaism at the time also had different ideas of what comprised of the First Covenant or Old Testament canon. That was why, again, that the Sadducees, for instance, when you read in the Best Story in the Gospels how it says that the Sadducees did not believe in angels, the Spirit, resurrection, that's because the books that they adhered to did not really speak about those matters, those topics. And I think that's why that it was the Torah, the first 5 books of Moshe that the Sadducees held to, because the Torah didn't really broach those subjects much. But then, like the Pharisees, they held to like the writings and the Nevi'im, the prophets, as being authoritative. And of course, in the writings, Tehillim, Psalms, Mishlei, Proverbs, the Nevi'im, the prophet books, they do go into issues such as angels and the Ruach, the Spirit, and resurrection. So that's why the Sadducees, they didn't care about Yahshua at all, because to them there was no resurrection. There was none of that. The Pharisees did care more because they saw books as being canonical that talked about those matters. So in that time, common Hebraic people, the people of Israel, they had different groups and sects of Judaism that they belonged to. So because of that, everybody was getting a different form of the Torah being preached to them. And this is where it's very important to understand the context about why Shaul was saying here in Romans chapter 2, where it's talking about the Yehudai, the Jew, and the law, and not being a hypocrite. How it says, for the name of Elohim is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, as it is written. When that particular period of time, especially in first century Judea, in that first century period, that was happening a lot. The people of Israel and the Judaism in general, was so fragmented and so fractured. There were so many different renderings, readings of Torah. So many of the leaders of Torah at that time were teaching so many different forms of it, of the law. Many of them to extort the common people of Israel, that the pure Torah was no longer being taught. The spirit of Torah was not being taught anymore. It was lost due to greed, due to avarice. And because of that, the name of Father was being blasphemed amongst anybody on the outside looking into the Jewish community, because their own religious leaders were making a blasphemous scandal of the sacred text that the people of Israel follow to worship their Almighty. And that's how that particular passage is fulfilled. In that time, there was a lot of false teachers. There was a lot of contention and controversy on how the Torah was being taught. Yahshua was teaching. He was the first person in hundreds of years to actually come along and teach the spirit of Torah in the right way. And that's one of the reasons why he was so hated by the Jewish aristocracy, the priests, the scribes, because he was properly teaching the spirit of Torah, of what it was meant to exist for, and they didn't like that. It's interesting, really, in a lot of ways, that the very thing that caused so much chaos in Judaism in that time, and all the different groups and sects, and the different books they considered canonical, the different scriptures, that was really a format that then Christians, hundreds of years later, started to emulate themselves. In fact, it's funny, I don't think it was concerning just the Jewish canon. It was not until about, I think it was 20 years after the fall of Jerusalem, when Rome sacked it. I think it was around 90 CE, that it wasn't until around the Council of Jamnia, that they started to actually come together around a consensus of what will be considered the authoritative Jewish canon. But it is interesting. Now you see the exact same thing echoed in Christianity, those same divisions. Now, moving on from there, in verse 25, for circumcision is indeed profitable if you keep the Torah. But if you are a breaker of the Torah, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. Therefore, if an uncircumcised man keeps the righteous requirements of the Torah, will not his uncircumcision be counted as circumcision? And will not the physically uncircumcised, if he fulfills the Torah, judge you who, even with your written code in circumcision, are a transgressor of the Torah? For he is not a Yehudai, Jew, who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the Ruach, the Spirit, not in the letter, whose praise is not from men, but from Elohim. So he was echoing the same thing that I've been teaching over these last two videos. Shaul was saying that if someone who is not circumcised, they're just a normal person, but yet they are keeping the Torah, they're keeping the mitzvah to father righteously. And you have a Yehudai Jew over here who he's circumcised, but he's breaking and violating Torah. Everything he does, he's dishonest, he extorts, hurts, steals, lies, cheats, murders. Then his circumcision accounts for nothing. Because Shaul was saying that true circumcision is in the heart. You can be physically circumcised all day long, but regardless of what your penis looks like, if you do not spiritually keep Father's Torah, then it doesn't matter what your anatomy looks like down there. It could mean less to Father. Circumcision was a symbolic sign of those who were supposed to keep Father's Torah, to designate his people for those who were not. But if you don't keep the observances of Torah, then your circumcision counts for uncircumcision because it's inward. And what he meant to say, again, Shaul, by telling the people that if you think that your salvation, if you think that being righteous just comes in the form of a letter, by saying, well, sure, I preach Torah and I say that the Torah is good and don't do this and don't do that. But if all you do is observe Torah just because it's just a legal document, you don't actually care, you have no love in your heart, you don't follow the spirit of Torah, being giving, compassionate, merciful, dedicated to Father out of subservient loyalty and love, then it's just a letter of law to you. True Torah observance and true circumcision comes from in the heart. And furthermore, a very important part is where in verse 25, Shaul says, for circumcision is indeed profitable if you keep the Torah. But if you are a breaker of the Torah, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. So this is, again, really good evidence that Shaul is not speaking against Torah. He's not speaking against Torah observance. He says, look, circumcision is profitable and good if you keep Torah. But if you don't, then you might as well be uncircumcised. So he didn't write and say, whether you keep Torah or whether you don't keep Torah, it means nothing. The Torah means nothing because your salvation is based completely on faith, completely on grace through faith. All that matters, you just believe that Yahshua died, you believe you're going to go to heaven, and that's it. To believe in that is faith, that's it. Nothing else matters. So if you do keep Torah, great. If you don't, who cares? It's all the same. Shaul didn't say that. Nowhere is that written. He's warning against hypocrisy. Do not hypocritically observe or practice Torah. Because if you do, then you are no better than someone who's completely uncircumcised and could care less about Father's Torah. What is in the heart is what matters. And the observance that comes out of the heart is what Father sees. So if you truly do keep Torah, then you will prove it and you will show it. It won't be just a physical sign in your male anatomy. It's going to be what you actually do with your actions and with the words that you speak. It will all show, spiritually speaking, that inside of you, you are a true keeper of Torah. Now, moving on to Galatia, or Galatians, chapter 2. I love Galatians because it's the book that so many Christians go to when they try to say Torah observance doesn't matter anymore. But unfortunately, that is, again, it's wrenching it out of context. It's not understanding what Shaul was attempting to convey. They cherry pick a few random passages. They ignore the context. They ignore the chapters, the full chapter content, the full content of Galatians. They ignore the greater body of Shaul, of Paul's work, and they arrive to foregone, erroneous conclusions based off of this. So, starting out, we're going to read the whole chapter for clarity. Not that the whole chapter is relevant, but we're going to read it anyway. Then, after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem, with Barnabas, and I also took Titus with me. And I went up by revelation and communicated to them that Besorah gospel, which I preach among the Gentiles, but privately to those who were of reputation, lest by any means I might run, or had run, in vain. Yet not even Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. And this occurred because of false brethren secretly brought in, who came in by stealth to spy out our liberty which we have in Yahshua HaMashiach, that they might bring us into bondage, to whom we did not yield submission even for an hour, that the truth of the Besorah, the gospel, might continue with you. But from those who seemed to be something, whatever they were, it makes no difference to me. Elohim shows personal favoritism to no man, which I highly disagree with, but okay. Look at the story of Yah-Dad. That's no better example. Father does show favoritism if he chooses to, and he has every right to. I mean, Father even said back in the Pentateuch, first 5 books of the first covenant, Old Testament, I believe it's either in Shemoth, Exodus, Reikra, Leviticus, where he literally says that he will show mercy to who he will. And to those he won't, he won't. He doesn't give a reason. It's just, if he wants to, he will. If he doesn't, he won't. Again, the life of Yah-Dad, there were sins that Yah-Dad committed that were worse than, or more egregious an act, per se, than maybe a predecessor who came before him. But Father did not punish him as badly. So Father does play favoritism. I mean, he does. He's got every right. He's the big guy. He's the creator. He's the boss. He can do whatever he wants to do. So I vehemently disagree with that. But, is what it is. For those who seemed to be something added nothing to me. But on the contrary, when they saw that the Besorah, the gospel for the uncircumcised, had been committed to me, as the Besorah gospel for the circumcised was to Kepha, Peter, for he who worked effectively in Kepha, Peter, for the apostleship to the circumcised, also worked effectively in me toward the Gentiles. And when Yaakov, James, Cephas, Peter, and Yachanan, John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that had been given to me, they gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, that we should go to the Gentiles, and they to the circumcised. They desired only that we should remember the poor, the very thing which I also was eager to do. Now when Kepha, Peter, had come to Antioch, I withstood him to his face, because he was to be blamed. For before certain men came from Yaakov, James, he would eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who were of the circumcision. And the rest of the Yehudim, Jews, also played the hypocrite with him, so that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the Besorah gospel, I said to Kepha, Peter, before them all, if you, being a Yehudai, Jew, live in the manner of Gentiles, and not as the Yehudim, Jews, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Yehudim? We who are Yehudim by nature, and not sinners of the Gentiles, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the Torah, but by faith in Yahshua HaMashiach, even we have believed in Mashiach Yahshua, that we might be justified by faith in Mashiach, and not by the works of the Torah. For by the works of the Torah no flesh shall be justified. But if, while we seek to be justified by Mashiach, we ourselves also are found sinners, Is Mashiach therefore a minister of sin? Certainly not. For if I build again those things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. For I through the Torah died to the Torah, that I might live to Elohim. I have been crucified with Mashiach. It is no longer I who live, but Mashiach who lives in me, but Mashiach lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Bane, meaning Son of Elohim, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of Elohim, for if righteousness comes through the Torah, then Mashiach died in vain. Now, a lot of people use this to say that Torah is dead. Torah doesn't matter. Torah observance doesn't matter. Again, context is incredibly important. You have to understand, first off, that this entire discourse was only brought up in the first place because the narrative involves hypocrisy. Okay? It involved Kepha, Peter, and other members of the assembly acting hypocritically toward Gentile believers. It also involves certain believers, certain Jewish believers, certain Hebraic believers, telling Gentile believers that the only way they could be saved is if they were circumcised, if they ardently kept Torah. It's the only way they could be saved, along with believing in Yahshua. But understanding historically, what a lot of people were doing in that time, in the first century, on a lot of very strict Jewish believers who did not fully understand the gravity of exactly what it was that Yahshua did, they put more emphasis, stringent emphasis, not just on being circumcised in Torah observance, but in pushing the particular Torah observance that those particular groups and men followed in that time. A lot of the sects of Jews in that time, they didn't follow and believe in the entire Torah, the entire Mosaic law, as we know it in the scriptures. Many groups of Jewish believers in that time, they followed and adhered to certain parts of Torah. Not the whole Torah, certain parts of Torah. They were hypocrites. They put more emphasis on circumcision than anything else. As long as you were circumcised, you were fine. Or as long as you observed this particular part of Torah, you were fine. So they weren't even teaching observance of whole Torah. It was only certain parts of Torah. So when Shaul says in the beginning that when they came in, that they heard that there were certain people who were compelling circumcision. You need to be circumcised. You need to be circumcised. He wasn't talking about Kepha and Yaakov and Yochanan, Peter, James, and John. He wasn't talking about them, that they were the ones who were doing it, but there were certain brethren who were creeping into the assemblies, and they were trying to convince people, mainly Gentile believers, that, well, you got to get circumcised. If you're not circumcised, there's no salvation. And it's very important to note that some of the Jewish groups in that time, that's literally all they would preach. It wasn't like a lot of these particular individuals were just teaching, well, you need to get circumcised and keep all of Torah while believing in Yahshua. That's not the whole story. There was a lot of Jewish groups in that time, Jewish believers, who believed in Yahshua, but they were Jewish and followed Torah. There were a lot of men in that time who believed that circumcision is all that mattered. It was being circumcised. If you weren't just circumcised, you couldn't be saved. And that's all they would teach. As long as you're circumcised, you're good. Now have all the faith in Yahshua you want. So they were hypocrites fully and entirely. They weren't actually teaching proper Torah observance. It was just one part, being circumcised. Now, the other part of it also deals with some of the apostles, men like Kepha, Peter, Yaakov, James, Yochanan, John, that they would associate with the Gentile believers. But when other members of the assembly, Jewish believers, especially a lot of these men who were teaching hypocrisy, circumcision, when they would come along, their Jewish brethren, they would pull back from the Gentile believers, not wanting to be seen with them, not wanting to be associated. Because it was still a very contentious matter in the early first century of the faith for Jewish believers and Gentile believers to be seen together, because for so long there had been such a divide between Father's community of Israelites and the rest of the world. It was very difficult to bridge that gap when the renewed covenant came along, and now, especially due to Shaul, Paul's ministry, Gentiles started coming in. There was a lot of cultural dissension there. So this is really what the narrative in Galatians chapter 2 is broaching. But you have to understand, the reply being given It's not just talking about Torah just to talk about Torah or condemn Torah for the sake of condemning Torah. It is targeting a very specific event, hypocrisy in the assembly. Certain Jewish believers coming in, teaching certain parts of Torah, teaching circumcision is all that matters. This was a reply to false teachings, false brethren who are confounding non-Jewish believers and telling them, well, you got to be circumcised. If you're not circumcised, well, you can't be saved. You have to be physically circumcised. It was a response to that, as well as a response to men like Kepha, Peter, and the others not being hypocritical, sitting and dining and talking to non-Hebraic believers, but then when their brethren would come along, pretending like the Gentile believers didn't exist anymore. It was a response to those people. All the rest of what is written, everything, all the rest of what is written in that chapter is a direct response to that. Again, if you, being a Yehudite Jew, live in the manner of Gentiles, and not as Yehudim, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Yehudim? So he was literally telling Kepha and the others, he was saying, look, if you're not going to properly observe or act as a Yehudim, if you're going to live and act like a Gentile, and you're not going to properly observe and keep all of Torah yourself, why are you trying to convince Gentiles to do what you're not doing? We who are Jews by nature and not sinners of the Gentiles, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the Torah, but by faith in Yahshua HaMashiach, even we have believed in Mashiach Yahshua, that we might be justified by faith in Mashiach and not by the works of the Torah, for by the works of the Torah no flesh be justified. So basically, Shaul was telling them, he was saying, look, we who are Yehudim, we have come to understand that the most important part of being saved, achieving salvation, is that spiritual atonement has been made through Yahshua HaMashiach. We've got to have faith in that. That is the most important thing. It's very important. He's not saying, nowhere here textually does he say that don't observe Torah anymore. The Torah is bad. He merely says you're not justified by the works of Torah. And in other words, to say you're not saved by it. You don't receive spiritual atonement. You are justified, you receive spiritual atonement through the new parameters of the renewed covenant. He's not saying Torah is not important. He's not saying it's bad. He's not saying don't observe it. He's saying you're not justified through it. You don't achieve salvation through it. Again, he is simply expounding upon a very common theme that we've already broached in yesterday's video. The parameters of the first covenant, Mosaic law, the Torah in its parameters did not allow spiritual salvation and atonement. It wasn't available. It did not allow that. Torah was important to live a righteous life, to live uprightly before Father, but it did not allow your spirit to be cleansed. So he was admonishing his fellow brethren, apostles, saying, do not let Gentile believers look at you and think, being impressionable and young in the faith, that if they put more focus and more emphasis on works and circumcision and the Torah, that they will be saved by those efforts of their own hands. Don't teach them that. They can observe Torah, be circumcised, but if you do not make clearly known to them that it is faith and the cleansing atonement of the Spirit that was done through Yahshua HaMashiach, and believing in that and being saved by that faith and that knowledge, if they don't understand that first and foremost, then you're leading them down a bad path to where they're going to become obsessed, as humans do, thinking their own works can justify them. Don't get it off kilter. That's all he was telling them. He was addressing hypocrisy. He was addressing false brethren who were coming in, and he was also teaching hypocrisy amongst his fellow apostles. So many people take this Galatia chapter 2, It's so badly, there are bumper stickers where people are literally, Christians who are very anti-Torah, there are little like car bumper stickers that'll say, have you read Galatians chapter 2? And people come away with this understanding of this chapter, the narrative, because they cherry pick a few random passages within chapter 2, like, for by the works of the law no flesh should be justified, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the Torah. They'll nitpick those few lines, but they ignore the greater context of the entire chapter. The narrative is not opening with Shaul just making a case to say Torah is bad. There is no need to observe Torah anymore. Torah is worthless. He never says that here. It's nowhere in the text that it's worthless or it's bad or it's no profit whatsoever. If he would have said that, Shaul would have made himself a liar and hypocrite himself, because then like in Romans, when he says, so is there no profit whatsoever being a Yehudai, a Jew? Certainly not. Or when he says that Torah is good and righteous and holy. He couldn't have said that, because if he had said that, he would have made himself a hypocrite. Because as we broached yesterday, there are places in his writings where Shaul speaks favorably of it in conjunction with salvation, going in hand in tandem. So, of course, in here in Galatians, he wouldn't have been speaking against it. Nowhere in the narrative is he blaspheming it or disparaging it. It doesn't open up with him making a case against Torah. He is specifically addressing hypocrisy, and he is addressing false brethren. That's it. It's all he's doing. And then again, as it goes down further from verse 17, but if, while we seek to be justified by Mashiach, we ourselves are also found sinners, is Mashiach therefore a minister of sin? Certainly not. So basically what he's saying here is, if we are claiming that we have salvation, we're saved by Yahshua's salvation, but yet we're going around and we're sinning, we're still flagrantly sinning, no different than the false brethren who are coming in teaching you must be physically circumcised, or being a hypocrite like some of the other apostles were, not showing love and compassion to their fellow believers, Gentile believers. If you're sinning in those actions, but you're seeking to be justified, saying you're justified by Yahshua, then Shaul's trying to make the point and saying, well, then does that make Yahshua a minister of sin, since we're claiming to be justified by him? Certainly not. For if I build again those things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. For I through the Torah died to the Torah, that I might live to Elohim. I have been crucified with Mashiach. It is no longer I who live, but Mashiach lives in me. So when he says, for I build again those things which I destroyed, for if I build again those things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. For I through the Torah died to the Torah, that I might live to Elohim. We don't need to go any farther than Shaul's past to understand what he was saying about that. Before he got salvation, Shaul was in the same boat as a lot of other Jews at the time were. He thought just because he had Torah and he was a Jew, he was automatically better than everyone. And he persecuted people. He killed the believers who believed in what Yahshua did. He was falling and fell to that same pit of thinking that he was better. He acted with hypocrisy. He held himself with a sense of false righteousness. And so again, because the narrative in this chapter is dealing with him addressing hypocrisy, false brethren, he's saying, look, if I build back up those things again, if I act that way, if I act in hypocrisy, if I do the same things that you're doing, if we do that, then I make myself a transgressor. But Shaul was saying that, for I through the Torah died to the Torah, that I might live to Elohim. Meaning that he finally came to understand, when he got saved, he came to understand the true nature of what Torah was. He understood how Yahshua fulfilled the need for sacrifices, being the ultimate propitiation, that it was through faith in that spiritual atonement that true salvation was given, Shaul came to understand that the Torah ultimately pointed to that ultimate atonement that would be made. He came to understand the true nature of what Torah was. It wasn't the basis of salvation, but it was the groundwork. It was a groundwork laid for how one was to live a righteous life, to point them to what gave them ultimate spiritual redemption. And when he understood that, truly understood that, he died to the erroneous precepts or misconceptions of Torah. False righteousness, thinking that your works make you perfect and a cut above the rest. So that, through this new understanding, he could live to Elohim. Because as a child of Yah, that's what you understand when you truly achieve salvation. You don't get this knowledge that Torah and the law of Torah and the law of Father is bad or evil, or that you don't need it anymore. You come to understand in humility that while the Torah is a beautiful thing because it teaches a beautiful way of life, a beautiful way to live toward Father and toward others, you understand in that humility that it doesn't make you better than other people. It doesn't give you independent righteousness. It doesn't excuse you and exonerate you from your human sin. You understand the beauty of Torah, but you understand the beauty of what Father gave, the ultimate substitutionary sacrifice through Yahshua, even more. You understand how much better that is, how it fulfills Torah, how it makes Torah so much better, that you can live by the righteous precepts of Torah, do those good things, do what is pleasing in Father's eyes, but spiritually you were atoned for through the sacrifice that Yahshua made. It adds a secondary beautiful layer to your understanding of Torah, and that's what Shaul meant when he said, "For I through the Torah died to the Torah that I might live to Elohim. I have been crucified with Mashiach. It is no longer I who live, but Mashiach lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of Elohim, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of Elohim, for if righteousness comes through the Torah, then Mashiach died in vain." Again, nowhere in here is he preaching against Torah. Nowhere in here is he saying it's bad or not to observe it or that he didn't observe it. He was trying to clarify, make a clear, concise point. Don't hang your righteousness up on Torah and think that that's what makes you good. That's what makes you great. That's what gives you salvation. Don't let it make you a hypocrite. Don't let it make you teach other people that your goodness and righteousness and salvation is pinned on, well, I observe the Torah. I'm a Torah observant believer, and it's enough to get me into the heavenly kingdom. My works make me righteous. Yeah, the salvation of Yahshua, that's a secondary point. Yeah, but, Torah, I'm a worker. I do. He was trying to clear up to the hypocrites, to his fellow hypocritical apostles, and to these false brethren coming in about what makes a truly saved believer. But he never talks against Torah. He never ever says, for it is forbidden now for us as believers to observe Torah, that we do not observe Torah, that the Torah has become unprofitable to us, or that the Torah has become replaced or absolved. He says, you're not righteous through Torah. You're not saved through the Torah. That by it alone, you achieve that status. That's all he was saying. He was trying to give a humble reality check to his brethren to say, look, just because you're a Jew, just because you got Torah, you're no better than anybody else. You're no better than these Gentile believers who've come in, who are now your brethren. Don't elevate yourself above them, because we now know through the sacrifice of Mashiach where we all stand. Torah advocates a righteous life, a way to live righteously, but it does not make us righteous. It is a way that we live in a righteous manner. But to act righteously does not make someone righteous. I mean, for instance, somebody can go out here and give $10,000 to a charity. That's a righteous action. But if they're doing it for, let's say, an ulterior reason, they themselves are not righteous. It's a precept. It's a righteous action, but they themselves are not righteous. You can live by the righteous precepts of Torah, but what makes you righteous in your heart is the Spirit of Father, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit living in you and atoning for you. That is what makes you righteous outwardly. So that when you observe Torah, you're going to do it because you want to do it, because you mean it, not because it's the letter, it's the law. I must do this. No, you will want to do it from your heart. Looking at Romans chapter 3. Give me a moment, I'm going to take a drink. What advantage then has the Yehudai, Jew, or what is the profit of circumcision? I just broached this. Here we go. Much in every way, chiefly because to them were committed the oracles, meaning prophecies, of Elohim. For what if some did not believe? Will their unbelief make the faithfulness of Elohim without effect? Certainly not. Indeed, let Elohim be true, but every man a liar, as it is written, that you may be justified in your words, and may overcome when you are judged. But if our unrighteousness demonstrates the righteousness of Elohim, what shall we say? Is Elohim unjust who inflicts wrath? I speak as a man. Certainly not. For then, how will Elohim judge the world? For if the truth of Elohim has increased through my lie to his glory, why am I also still judged as a sinner? And why not say, let us do evil, that good may come? As we are slanderously reported, and as some affirm that we say, their condemnation is just. What then? Are we better than they? Not at all. For we have previously charged both Yehudim, Jews, and Greeks, that they are all under sin. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none who understands, there is none who seeks after Elohim. They have all turned aside, they have together become unprofitable. There is none who does good, no, not one. Their throat is an open tomb, with their tongues they have practiced deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood, destruction and misery are in their ways. And the way of peace they have not known, there is no fear of Elohim before their eyes. Now we know that whatever the Torah says, it says to those who are under the Torah, that every mouth may be stopped and all the world may become guilty before Elohim. Therefore, by the deeds of the Torah, no flesh shall be justified in his sight, for by the Torah is the knowledge of sin. Elohim's righteousness through faith is this. But now the righteousness of Elohim apart from the Torah is revealed, being witnessed by the Torah and the Nevi'im, prophets, even the righteousness of Elohim through faith in Yahshua HaMashiach, to all and on all who believe. For there is no difference. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of Elohim, being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Mashiach Yahshua, whom Elohim set forth as a propitiation by his blood, through faith to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance Elohim had passed over the sins that were previously committed, to demonstrate at the present time his righteousness, that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Yahshua. Where is boasting then? Is it excluded? By what law? Of works? No, but by the law of faith. Therefore we conclude that a man is justified by faith apart from the deeds of the Torah. Or is he the Elohim of the Yehudim only? Is he not also the Elohim of the Gentiles? Yes, of the Gentiles also, since there is one Elohim who will justify the circumcised by faith and the uncircumcised through faith. Do we then make void the Torah through faith? Certainly not. On the contrary, we establish the Torah. Now, it is important to note the audience that is being spoken of concerning Ramia, Romans. Shaul is speaking to both a Gentile audience and a Yehudim, a Jewish audience. What he's trying to tell the people of Ramia, the Romans, the Gentile crowd, and what he's also trying to tell the Israelite believers, the Israeli believers, is no matter whether you are Gentile or whether you are Yehudim, you are Jew, there is one way that all man is justified, one way that all man is spiritually saved, and that is through faith in Yahshua HaMashiach and what it was that Father gave him to do. There is one way to be spiritually atoned. That's it. He's trying to tell the Gentile audience, do not listen to what many Jewish people say, what many of the Jewish crowd say, that it is through works alone and circumcision alone that one is saved and one achieves salvation. Because still, so many of the Jews were battling with this mindset that had been instilled for generations that by observing Torah, being circumcised, that automatically made you righteous. Generational precepts are hard to undo. He was telling Gentile believers, don't be pulled into this way of thinking that if you practice Torah and be circumcised, that alone is going to excuse you and save you. Don't be pulled into that. But he's also saying, both to them and to the Jewish audience, so he doesn't offend anyone, and he doesn't people don't draw erroneous conclusions and put words in his mouth. He also says, but is there profit to be had in being Yehudite, a Jew? Of course there is. When you break this down, what advantage then has the Yehudite, the Jew? Or what is the profit of circumcision? Much in every way, chiefly because to them were committed the oracles or prophecies of Elohim. For what if some did not believe? Would their unbelief make the faithfulness of Elohim without effect? Certainly not. He's basically saying that if there are people, there were Jews who didn't believe, didn't observe, didn't follow, didn't walk in the true meaning and spirit of Torah, did that make the faithfulness of Father without effect? Basically meaning that what Father was doing didn't amount for nothing, that there were some false representatives, people that weren't representing properly. Certainly not. Indeed, let Elohim be true, but every man a liar, as it is written, that you may be justified in your words and may overcome when you are judged. That was Father's hope. That was Father's intent, was that if we truly follow what is righteous in Father's eyes, and we feel it in our heart and in our being, that when we speak, we're not speaking falsely, we're not lying, that when we speak our words, we mean them and we're true when we say them. And that when the day comes we are to be judged, our heart and our actions may be proven true. That we weren't just saying it just to say it. But if our unrighteousness demonstrates the righteousness of Elohim, what shall we say? It is through our inability to do the right things without fail, because of the humanity in us. That is what proves Father's true righteousness, his true nature. Is Elohim unjust who inflicts wrath? I speak as a man, certainly not. For then how will Elohim judge the world? In saying, is Elohim unjust who inflicts wrath? A lot of people look at Father, I've heard this many times. People say, well, God is he's a tyrant, he's cruel, he's full of wrath. Well, that's unjust. Man's idea of what is just and what is right and what is fair is massively skewed. Father is above Torah. Father is perfect. He's the only perfect being in existence. Father can measure out judgment and wrath because he is the only perfect one. He gave us a Torah. He gave us what is right and what is wrong for a reason, so that when it is transgressed and when it is to our own hurt, whenever we transgress and we do what is wrong, especially if we choose to do what is wrong, we never seek redemption. Father is proven righteous in all of his judgment by being able to say, I gave you the oracles. I gave you the prophecy. I gave you the Torah. I gave you what is right versus what is sinful in my eyes. And if you choose to live in a life of sin, I am justified to pour out wrath upon you. For if the truth of Elohim has increased through my lie to his glory, why am I also still judged as a sinner? So if we go around, and we all do this, we say that we're good, we're righteous. We think that we can be our own law. We can basically be our own form of salvation, or that we can be justified apart from Father, apart from his grace. We prove ourselves a liar real fast, because no human can maintain that and keep that. And if, through proving that we cannot do it ourselves, we yet again prove Father right, and we glorify him through that, there was a reason for him to give a spiritual atonement that we could not achieve for ourselves. And that lays all the glory at his feet, and not us on our own prideful works. And why am I also still judged a sinner? And why not say, let us do evil, that good may come, as we are slanderously reported, and as some affirm that we say, their condemnation is just. He was basically saying that there were certain people, certain brethren who were speaking of Shaul and others with him. There were those that accused him and others like him of saying, let's go out here therefore and do evil and do a whole bunch of bad stuff, that good may come. That was something they were being slandered by others as saying. And you know, it's funny, the reason why this came is for the very reason, it's the very pitfall that a lot of believers and Christians fall into today. Because there are so many Christians that think that Torah does not matter anymore. They think that when you're saved spiritually, the Spirit is what saved, your flesh sins, but your spirit's fine, you can do what you want to do. Basically, that now sin has no hold, so you're fine. Those same people hold that general mindset that, well, I mean, there is no evil for us. You know, and anything that happens, with sin that we do commit, bad things that happen, that just proves that we need the salvation of Father, we need the salvation of Elohim, and therefore, by our sin and by doing bad, we justify him and show him to be good. There's a lot of people that use that as an excuse. A lot of people today, a lot of Christians use that as an excuse to sin and be less than what they should, to be lazy and apathetic and lethargic in their faith, because they say, well, I'm saved by grace, you know, and all of my sin and all my bad qualities, it justifies the Almighty because it shows he's good and I'm bad. Shaul was saying that in his time, people were twisting his words and twisting what he was saying to make it seem like he was teaching that he was saying, oh, we're saved grace through faith, so go sin and sin as much as you want, and good will come because it shows the righteousness and the goodness of Father. And what does Shaul say about the people that accused him of that? That the condemnation of those people was just. Because Shaul knew that people were twisting his words. He wasn't going around saying that there was no sin anymore, that there was no Torah, there was no righteous way to live. He was teaching that it is through the atonement of Yahshua's sacrifice that spiritual salvation was attained. It did something Torah could not do. It was not in the legal bounds of Torah. And therefore, don't hang your hat of righteousness on the fact that, well, my works are good, my works, I'm righteous. Because, no, you're not. You still have spiritual sin. You're still in fleshly, physical form. Only the gift of Father, the grace of Father, in giving you spiritual atonement, do you have true annulment of humanity, of your human sin. That's what he was teaching in all of his epistles, all of his letters, all of his ministry. But people were twisting his words to say, make it sound like he was saying, no, you know, we're saved now. Absolution of sin. Man, now, whatever sin now we commit as wicked beings, it's supposed to be that way, and through our sin, it glorifies Elohim, it glorifies Father. And Shaul, rather than affirming it and saying that they were right by judging me of this, instead he said that the people who accused him of that were slandering him and others, and that the condemnation of those people will be just, because they were twisting the word spoken. What then? Are we better than they? Not at all. For we have previously charged both Jews and Greeks that all are under sin, Yet again, he's showing that clear line. He's again, Ramia Romans is speaking to Gentiles and Jewish readers, audiences, to stark cultural audiences. And yet again, he's showing no hypocrisy. Am I a Jew? Or are you a Jew better than this Gentile believer? Are you better? No, you're not. Under this renewed covenant, under this new way, all are found sinners. All are found to, in some way, transgress against Father. Even if you try to live a righteous life by Torah, which you should observe Torah. You should desire to do the Kodesh things of Father. But you are going to mess up. You are going to stumble. In your heart, in your mind. You're human, you will. Therefore, because we all do that, none of us are better than the other. As it goes on. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks after Elohim. They have all turned aside. They have together become unprofitable. There is none who does good, no, not one. Their throat is an open tomb. With their tongues they have practiced deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips. Whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways. In the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of Elohim before their eyes. That was a First Testament, Old Covenant prophetic narrative and the Nevi'im and the prophets that was given a very clear and concise view into the mind of man. It does not matter how Kodesh you are. It doesn't matter how good you try to be. It doesn't matter how given you are. It doesn't matter how much of Torah that you observe. You are still going to have evil thoughts occasionally. You're going to have bad impulses. You're going to have moments of pure humanity. If you have one day, you can walk uprightly for 10 straight years, but if you have one day where you act unrighteously, that's it. You have sinned. And Father is perfect. Father cannot have that in his kingdom with him. And because every person, at least once in their life, is going to do that. At least once, and I'm being fair there. Therefore, not one person is eligible to go to heaven by their own, the kingdom of heaven. Not one person, therefore, is eligible to go by their own works. Because if you mess up one time in your life, you are imperfect, you have sinned, you have committed fallacy, you have committed rebellion, and that is unacceptable to the Almighty Elohim. Therefore, he had to provide a way, a spiritual atonement that could cleanse you of those human foibles, those human imperfections. So that in spite of those things, in spite of when you stumble, trying to follow Torah, trying to live by the righteous precepts of Father, so that when you stumble, you have got a gift given to you to be able to repent, to seek forgiveness, and to keep going, and not be struck down and written off the list. Now we know that whatever the Torah says, it says to those who are under the Torah, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before Elohim. Therefore, by the deeds of the Torah, no flesh shall be justified in his sight, for by the Torah is the knowledge of sin. This, again, goes perfectly in hand with what I was teaching yesterday. Through Torah came knowledge of sin. It doesn't matter whether you agree with it or whether you disagree with the precepts of Torah. Father flat out says, you shall do this and you shall not do this. Therefore, if you do those things, you think those things, you practice those things, you will have to shut your mouth. You have no word to say, and you will be guilty before Elohim. The Torah brought the knowledge of sin. It brought the knowledge of what is wrong. Therefore, if you go to stand before Father and you say, well, I knew sin because I followed Torah my whole life, and that's all I followed, because I believe that I followed Torah my whole life, and I believe that I followed it faithfully, and I'm good to go. Let me in. Father will say to you, you say that you knew my Torah, and therefore then you should know your own nature. For it is by the flesh of man, as I said, that every thought and intent of man from his birth is wicked. Therefore, how can you say to me that you walked a life of uprightness and Torah, and that I should let you into my kingdom. For by the knowledge of my Kodesh law, you knew what was wrong. And yet, in your life, there was sin found in you. And then you would argue and you would say, well, but, I didn't sin, do this or that. And he would say, but you thought it. You considered this. And therefore, that was an imperfection. That was a violation of my Kodesh precepts, my Kodesh law. You will say to him, or you'll say to Yahshua, who Father gave the power of judgment concerning who comes into the kingdom and who doesn't, who's really saved and who isn't. You look at Yahshua and you'll say, well, but, I did this really good thing. Yahshua will say, yes, but you also did this. But I did this, but you also did this. It's always going to be a back and forth. For every good thing you did, you will have done bad. Somewhere along the way, your human nature will be found wanting. You will have stumbled and fallen short. Period. It is unavoidable. But through spiritual atonement, that covers that. That's what Shaul means by the works, the deeds of the Torah, no flesh shall be saved and justified. Because all sin, all still sin regardless. It's impossible not to for normal man. Therefore, you need propitiation. You need spiritual atonement. But now the righteousness of Elohim, apart from the Torah, is revealed, being witnessed by the Torah and the Nevi'im, the prophets, even the righteousness of Elohim, through faith in Yahshua HaMashiach, to all and on all who believe, meaning that Father showed his true righteousness, apart from Torah, meaning that through Father revealing Torah and what was right and what was wrong. Now we know, and now we do the things that are wrong. Even if we don't want to, we will do the things that are wrong. Father shows his righteousness, saying that, see, I told you what was right, and you know what was wrong anyway, so you're not perfect. You're not me. You're not like me. You are perfect. You are sinful. And then through that, he can show his true righteousness that came about through having faith in the propitiation, the substitutionary sacrifice that he gave in sending Yahshua. And if you believe in and accept that, which that promise of what he would send to prove his own righteousness over ours and to truly justify us, that was spoken of. It was promised in the Torah. It truly was. There was a foreshadow of that, of what Yahshua would come to do. The Nevi'im, the prophets, clearly foreshadowed the greater righteousness that would come, that Father would truly show his true righteousness and what he would give us in spite of our actions. For there is no difference, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of Elohim. See, there it is again, for all have sinned. Being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Yahshua HaMashiach, whom Elohim set forth as a propitiation by his blood through faith to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance Elohim had passed over the sins that were previously committed to demonstrate at the present time his righteousness, that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Yahshua. So in a funny way, Shaul was also saying here that in Father making the Torah known, it was his way of checking our pride, basically. If there had never been a Torah, never been a law to tell us what was right from wrong, we'd be ignorant. And we could therefore go around doing things we thought was right and say, hey, I'm good. I'm a good guy. I do what's right. But Father says, nobody's going to do that with me. I'm the only one who's righteous and good and just. So instead, I'm going to show you and make known to you what is wrong. Because there are things that are wrong in my eyes. And you're going to do them. You're going to do those bad things because it's in your nature. You will do those things. And when you do, I'm going to be proven to be righteous, the only righteous one, just when I execute wrath, And you will be checked in your humility, because understanding that no matter how much you try to do righteously, no matter how much you try to walk by my Kodesh Torah, my Kodesh law, as you should, because you try, but you will still sin. Therefore, you will come to me in humility and realize that you were not good enough and that you need to accept the gift I gave through my Son. Laying down all your humility before my feet to say, I need this after all. I wasn't just before you. You are the only one who's just. I'm sorry. Shaul was basically saying here in layman's terms, what Father did, he did as a humility check to us, to check our pride. Where is boasting then? It is excluded. By what law? Of works? No, but by the law of the faith. Therefore, yet again, it proves. So is boasting excluded on account of the law? No. If all you hold to is just the law by itself, no faith in Yahshua, in the sacrifice, the gift that was given, then if you just live by pure works thinking you're good enough, you'll boast all day long. But by the Torah of faith, by the law of faith, realizing you're not good enough, even by following Torah and following righteous works, which is important, that it's still not enough because you're still going to mess up. Then by the understanding that you need that faith, that by faith you have got to accept that grace, while still striving to please Father, once you accept that and understand that, you will cease to boast, because you're not going to think yourself righteous anymore. You're going to understand your true nature. Therefore, we conclude that a man is justified by faith, apart from the deeds of the Torah. Now, yet again, I've heard Christians say that. They're like, it's by faith. You're justified by faith, not the law. So the law doesn't matter. Don't observe the law. Again, Shaul did not say here that therefore you're justified by faith. Observance of the law is no more. He said you're justified by faith, apart from the deeds of the Torah, of the law. You are justified by faith apart from the deeds of the Torah. Apart from. Your faith, not only in believing in what you were given through Father opening the way of salvation, not only is it faith in that, but also faith in understanding why it is that we do the works we do. Why is it that you observe Torah? Why is it that you do the righteous things that Father set forth for us to do, the good works He set forth for us to do, which coincides with Torah? Why do we do those things? Not for ourselves, because we're not good enough by our own measure to get in. It is understanding by faith that if we do those righteous things that Father set us to do, we are glorifying Him. We are doing what is pleasing to Him. And that, with the faith and the belief and the knowledge that even still we're not good enough by ourselves, but it is through what Father gave through Yahshua, that by the faith in those things, we will be justified. Because if we live by deeds alone, thinking that's good enough, all I need is works, nothing more, no faith, that's it, your human iniquities will not be atoned for. Spiritual atonement will still not live in you or abide in you or be given to you. You will still live in error. You will still live in imperfection. Spiritual waste. And all the way here at the bottom, Shaul had to further clarify that he was not making the Torah void. And I think this is really Incredible, the people that say that Torah doesn't matter anymore and that you don't have to observe Torah and that Torah is no longer part of our life. Because here at the bottom, Shaul made sure to clarify that's not what people would take from what he was saying, because he says here at the very bottom in verse 31, do we then make void the Torah through faith? Certainly not. On the contrary, we establish the Torah. So by living in faith and living under this renewed covenant, we're not absolving and doing away with Torah. We're not living contrary to it. By living with Father's Ruach inside of us, by understanding what truly it is that justifies us, it makes us humble. It makes us desirous to do and live righteously for Father, for Him, not for us, for Him. We then observe Torah. We then do the right things. We then live righteously through Father's grace living in us, through His Ruach living in us, allowing us to do those good, righteous things. By that, we establish His Torah. We show it to be the good and right and just law that it is. By accepting who and what we are in humility, letting Father's Ruach come live in us so that we can live a life in the Ruach and the Spirit, and therefore uphold the Torah as we should be upholding it, in humility and sincerity of heart, not out of precept, not out of vainglorious pride, but out of true love and obedience and faithfulness to Father. All right, I'm going to pause real fast, and then we'll be right back. So we might have to do a part 3, but I'm going to read some of these, and then again, we might come back for one final part in this. I'm going to read to you a couple scriptures that very clearly shows, that Shaul, Paul, he was not against Torah. He himself kept Torah, observed Torah, even as a believer. These are going to be the scriptures. Up to this point, I've really expounded on the scriptures a lot of people look at, where they try to say that he was preaching against Torah. He was teaching against it, and I was clarifying what he really meant. Now we're going to look at the scriptures where very clearly Shaul is speaking for Torah, that he observed Torah. And Master Slickum, Acts 24:14. But this I confess to you, that according to the way, which they call a sect, the way, meaning the way of salvation, the renewed covenant way. That's what it was originally called, the way. It wasn't called Christianity. It was called the way. So I worship the Elohim of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the Torah and the Nevi'im. But I confess this to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, so I worship the Elohim of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the prophets. Saying that he worships the Elohim of the people of Israel, the same as all the rest do, and he believes all the things that Father set down in the Torah and in the Nevi'im. And then he further clarifies that point, that thought, in Master Slickum, Acts 25:8. While he answered for himself, neither against the Torah, the law of the Yehudim, Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I offended in anything at all. Now, if Paul would not have been keeping Torah, if he would have stopped, if he wouldn't have been observing Shabbat anymore, the feasts anymore, the mitzvot, he would have never been able to say that he was against the Torah, the temple. If he would have no longer been keeping those, he would have been offending. He, as a Yehudim, as a Jew himself, a Yehudai, if he would not have still been observing those things, he would have been offending. He would have been transgressing. He would have literally been a sinner. But he says, neither against the Torah of the Yehudim, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I offended in anything at all. He observed. He still maintained. And of course, where it says Caesar, it means that he wasn't speaking against the established state, the Roman Empire. He wasn't teaching rebellion. And Master Slickum, Acts 18:21, but took leave of them, saying, I must by all means keep this coming feast in Yerushalayim, but I will return again to you, Yah willing. And he sailed from Ephesus. Now, Why was it that Shaul was saying that by all means he had to make it to the coming feast in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem? A lot of people don't know this, but it's actually the feast, or a lot of people think that he was talking about the day of, or the feast of Pentecost. A lot of people don't know that the day of Pentecost when the Ruach HaKodesh came upon the disciples, that actually happened right around the time of the Feast of Booths. A lot of people don't know that. And what's interesting is, this is glaring, the day of Pentecost was not marked as a feast. There was no ordinance from the divine that the day of Pentecost believers had to hold a feast. The day of Pentecost was never called a feast day. It was never called a day you were to gather together for a convocation, ever. Feast in the scriptures refer to the biblical feasts, the biblical festivals. So when Shaul was trying to get to Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem, to the temple, to observe the feast, he was talking about one of the biblical feasts, showing he still observed the Torah. He still observed the biblically instituted feast days. He was still observing that. Okay, yet again. And Rami of Romans 7:25. I thank Yah through Yahshua HaMashiach our Master. So then, with the mind I myself serve the Torah of Yah, but with the flesh the law of sin. Yet again, and we broached this yesterday, Shaul was once again saying that he, up in his mind, in his desires, he serves the Torah of Father, meaning he was still observing it. He was still practicing Torah. But he was thankful that through the sacrifice of Yahshua, that his members, his physical body that would still commit sin, he had a propitiation for that. So now he could observe the Torah of Father as he knew was right and good, but through the sacrifice of Yahshua, he could be free from knowing that he will be damned regardless because his members committed sin. He was thankful for that. Thankful that Father saw his iniquity, his shortcoming. That on his own, through Torah observance, he just couldn't come close enough. He was thankful for what the sacrifice of Yahshua HaMashiach offered. So that now with his mind he can serve the Torah of Father. And his members that serve the law of sin has the ability to be forgiven for those trespasses. In Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 through 17, so let no one judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body of the Mashiach. Now, a lot of believers think that means that Shaul was saying that believers who wanted to observe, or if someone saw somebody who's wanting to observe these Jewish precepts, or if a Jewish believer came to a Gentile believer and said, well, why don't you observe the Shabbat? Why don't you observe new moons? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? A lot of people interpret that. They think it means that someone who does observe Torah has the right to come to a believer who doesn't and judge them on it and say, why aren't you doing that? A lot of people think that's what Shaul was saying, but contextually, if you read this carefully, that's not what he's saying. Shaul says, so let no one judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a festival or a new moon or Shabbats, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body of Mashiach. What does that mean? the Torah very clearly has things like abstinence on certain foods and drink, such as don't drink blood. Also times which you can and can't drink wine. It has institutions of, like for instance, a lot of the feasts. They were cycled around the moon, like new moons. It's how you counted time for a lot of the feasts. Shabbat. And not just your annual weekly Shabbat, but also high Shabbat days. Usually always the first day and the last day of high convocation, festivals, feasts. All those things are part of Torah, part of Jewish culture, the Mosaic Law. Shaul says, so let no one judge you in food or in drink or regarding a festival or a new moon or Shabbats, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body of Mashiach. Now, what did he mean by a shadow of things to come? It's important the context is not past tense. Shaul didn't say that these things were a shadow of things to come, or these things are a shadow of what once was. He says, which are a shadow of things to come. So, if those observances of Torah, eating and drinking, Shabbats, festivals that coincide with new moons, if those things, those observances, are a shadow of things to come, that is alluding to a time in the future when all believers in the world will observe these righteous Kodesh things of Father. They are a shadow of things to come. Things to come. At the time, then and even now, the whole world didn't observe Father's Torah, his Shabbats, his new moons, his festivals. The whole world didn't observe them. Only Jews did. Only those who followed the Torah, the Hebraic law. But Shaul said that those observances of Torah that some of the Jewish believers were still practicing within the Renewed Covenant Assembly, he said that those things are a shadow of things to come. And not to let anyone judge believers who still observe those things. Don't let them judge you for that. So what he was actually saying was the contrary. What Shaul was trying to say is, if anybody comes to you like a Gentile believer, and you're a Jewish believer, or maybe you're a Gentile believer who gets saved, but you also want to learn how to observe Torah. If someone comes to you and you observe Shabbat, or you abstain from pork, or you don't drink certain drinks, you observe the festivals, the feasts. If someone comes to you and judges you on that, don't worry about it. Don't let them. Because the only thing that believers are allowed to judge one another in is the body of Mashiach. So let no one judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a festival or a new moon or Shabbats, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body of Mashiach. The only thing that believers were to judge one another in is the matters of the body of Mashiach, meaning how that the Renewed Covenant Assembly was to live. That was it. How they were to live. Which ironically encompassed Torah, the righteous observances of Father. So it's funny that the modern interpretation has completely twisted that to where a lot of people think that it means, like I said, that if somebody is observing those things, you have the right to judge them for it and say, well, what are you doing that for? What are you observing Shabbat and this and that for? You don't have to do that anymore. It's absolved. According to text, what Shaul was actually saying was that don't judge one another on that, because those things are a shadow of what's to come. Judge the body of Mashiach. So ironically, if somebody, a believer, brethren, within the assembly, was to be giving someone who was observing Shabbat a hard time, or someone who was not observing Shabbat, Because the righteous Torah of Father is still as righteous as it always was. It's still as Kodesh and holy as it always was. You had a right as a believer in the body of Mashiach, belonging to the same body that Yahshua did. You have the right to judge in the body of Mashiach, to go to your brother, not in a sense of eternal condemnation, looking down at them and point your finger at them and saying you're going to hell, but to help your brother, to build up, to edify your brother. You were to go to them and say, why don't you observe Shabbat? Why do you not do this? Why do you not understand? Do you not know? It's actually the polar opposite of what a lot of people think. Because again, very clearly, food, drink, new moon, Shabbats, those things are a shadow of things to come. So therefore, being the body of Mashiach, the assembly, the body of believers, we are actually being told to do the exact opposite. We are to do the righteous things of Father. Not to harshly judge and condemn somebody who's not. If they don't want to, they won't. But don't let them judge you for it. And furthermore, if your brethren absolutely refuses, they don't want anything to do with it. I don't want anything to do with that Hebraic stuff. And you say, okay. You have no right to judge their spirit. You have no idea what they're going to do, where they're going to go. You don't know what their future is going to hold. But you have no right to judge their spirit, their life. These things are things of shadows, a shadow of things to come. And as the body of Mashiach, following the righteous ways of Father, no different than how Yahshua followed the righteous ways of Father, we do the same. We are inclined to do the same because we are his children and his Ruach lives in us, his spirit. And our desire to still uphold those things, we have a desire to do because it is righteous in a Father. And one day, there's going to come a time that everyone will observe those things. Ergo, right now, if you observe these things right now, you yourself, it is a shadow of things that will be to come. This is actually going to go on. I figured this was going to happen. This is actually going to go on a lot longer. There was more I actually want to say on that, but we're already at an hour and 48 minutes. So what I'm going to do is, we got a good introduction on that particular verse, Colossians 2, 16 through 17, about the festivals, new moon, Shabbats, shadow things to come. That's actually going to open up a whole nother aspect of Torah observance and Torah observance for children of Yah. And it's probably going to get pretty lengthy, so I'm not going to get into that right now, because if I do, I guarantee it's probably going to take us, it's going to take me at least another hour, hour and a half to get into this. So that would take me like 3 hours, and that's just going to be way too long. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop this here for today. And then I'll be back. I'm going to do a part 3. It's like I told you guys. I think I told you. If I didn't yesterday, I apologize. But I thought I said yesterday that I might end up doing 3 parts. But I definitely will. But it should only be a part 3. I should be able to get everything else in a part 3. Yeah, I should be able to. But whether I do or whether I don't, it doesn't matter. I mean, I knew going into this, anytime that you're talking about things like the Torah, you're getting into some extremely, extremely deep, complex theological matters. So I had a feeling this would happen. It's worth it. I mean, it's very deep, and this is a huge misconception amongst a bunch of believers, a lot of Christians out here. So it's a big deal to talk about this and understand Torah in relation to the lifestyle of a believer. So even if it does come in a couple parts, no big deal. But yeah, I'm going to be back tomorrow. If I'm not back tomorrow is Friday for me. So tomorrow is my preparation day before my Shabbat this weekend. So I may not get to it tomorrow. If I don't get to it tomorrow, because I'll be cleaning house and doing a whole bunch of stuff tomorrow to be ready for Shabbat, then you will probably get the part 3 from me, I'm going to say, on Monday. So look for this video to maybe be out by Monday, I'm going to say, because I'll clean all day tomorrow, be ready for Shabbat. I'll, of course, rest all day Shabbat, and then on Sunday, I'll probably then record that video, part 3, and then it won't come out till Monday. So we won't get anything more until the next week. So that'll give you guys a chance to catch up on the first 2 parts. Maybe go back and watch the first part again, listen to this part again. As usual, if you have any questions, please feel free to talk to me, ask me. I will gladly answer any questions you have. If you want to talk, if you want to ask legitimate questions, I only answer legitimate questions. I don't argue or debate with anybody. So if you just don't agree, then I wouldn't even waste your time giving a response, a reply, because I will not respond to that. And that's it. So thank you guys. And if you yourself are Shabbat keepers, then I hope you have a Kodesh, meaning a set-apart Shabbat. So as it is said, Shabbat Shalom, which means may you be full of peace and well-being on this coming Shabbat.